Hi, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. Thanks for joining us tonight. As you're all kind of joining us, just know if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. I will be looking at that at the end of the program. So questions go in the Q&A box. And you're going to be emailed this recording as well. I'll email it out in the next few days or so. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah McHale. I am the Community Engagement Specialist with the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. We are a nonprofit land trust located about an hour northwest of Chicago in Illinois. And what we like to do is preserve and take care of land and support the landowners who want to do the same thing. So there's a couple different ways we do that through education programs, and we have volunteer groups, and we restore and take care of land. So if you are not in this area and you want to get connected with your local land trust to find out ways you can support them and then they can support you, just go to a website called findalandtrust.org and type your zip code in and get connected with your local land trust that way. We're all nonprofits, so we depend on member support. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about how to support pollinators in your gardens in the fall and winter months as well. And I get asked this question all the time, like, what should I do to clean up my garden? And I'm here to tell you that really one of the best things you can do is nothing. Is leave your leaves and leave your stems. That's basically what it's going to come down to, but we're going to go into a little bit more of the science and stuff behind that. So for those of you who are just joining, put your questions in the Q&A box. I'll go through it at the end and look at that. Okay, so it's the time of the year where leaves are going to start falling out of the trees, landing on our lawns. Everybody freaks out about their lawns are going to die if they're covered up with too many leaves. And in some cases, yeah, when you have a really thick layer of leaves down, it is going to smother your lawn. So what to do with all those leaves? And a lot of people are just putting them in like lawn waste bags and sticking them out at the street and allowing them to be hauled away. And I'm here to tell you, don't do that. Save those leaves. And we're going to go into why, but basically there's a bunch of cool insects and their eggs and cocoons and all kinds of stuff in those leaves. And so I understand though that you maybe don't want to completely smother and kill all of your lawn. So a good compromise is to just leave a thin layer of leaves on the lawn. And a rule of thumb that I tell people is to be able to see through the leaf layer and be able to see actual lawn through the leaf layer. And that's pretty thin enough. Some leaves breaking down actually adds organic matter to your soil, which is good for your lawn as well. But then what to do with the rest of the leaves, since I'm telling you not to bag them up or not to just rake them into a pile and burn all of them. If you're able to rake them into your gardens and actually have them in your gardens, cool, do that. Now I know that some people have just huge amounts of leaves, and that's not always going to be an option. Great. If you can at least get 2 inches of leaves in your gardens, that's what's going to, they found, actually mimic the benefits of a thick leaf litter that we have in the woods. So it's beneficial for your soil. It's beneficial for the microbes in the soil when those leaves break down. They're adding nutrients to the soil. They're adding organic matter that ends up kind of opening up the soil a little bit and allowing oxygen and water and things to be absorbed better. So these leaves actually act like a little sponge. Basically, when the rain falls on them, they actually do absorb a lot more water than, say, soil that is in a woodland that has no leaf litter on it. And as you're going to see in just a little bit, there's a ton of insects actually inside and attached to those leaves. So we're recommending that you leave your leaves whole. Don't necessarily shred them up. So I know some people will put some leaves in compost piles. Maybe they like run them over with a lawnmower first and kind of chip them up. And one thing that happens when you do that is you're actually destroying potentially different kinds of insects, whether it's their eggs, their cocoons, all different life stages exist in dead leaves. It's really interesting. So we do all this work with our native plant gardens, right? Where we want to support these pollinators during the growing season. And then we kind of forget about that come fall and winter. And so I'm telling you guys not to do that. Just because we don't see them doesn't mean that they can't still use a little bit of a helping hand from us. So just leave your leaves whole when possible. So it is difficult to get leaves, especially lots of leaves, to break down when they are whole in a compost pile. So what I usually tell people to do, if you're able to do this, like my mom does this, it's pretty cool. She's just got like a big chicken wire kind of area that she just stacks leaves in there. She just piles leaves in there year round, and leaves the leaves whole. And then, as they're breaking down, you could take from the bottom and use that as compost and add that to your compost pile or directly on your vegetable gardens. I mean, your vegetable gardens come like November or something here in Northern Illinois. Putting leaves on your vegetable gardens is an excellent compost. So late fall is a great time to be putting compost on top of your vegetable gardens to be ready for next spring. So that's another place to be putting some of these leaves, is right on top of your vegetable garden. It's free mulch. Like, why would we want to get rid of this, right? And put it out at the street. So one example of a butterfly that depends on leaf litter as part of their life cycle is this cute little red banded hair streak. They actually lay their eggs on the bottom of dead leaves, under leaves that are just laying on the ground underneath their host tree, like an oak tree or something like that. So they're just laying their eggs right on the bottom of one of those leaves that are laying on the ground. And then those eggs next year are going to hatch into a caterpillar, which is going to be able to eat all the dead leaf litter. Okay. So there's also bumblebees that are burrowing underneath our fallen leaves, and all kinds of things are using the leaf litter. So leave those leaves whole if you're able to. And guess what? It's less work. Cool. Another example, and I love this one because the cocoon looks exactly like a dead leaf, is the polyphemus moth. These are so neat. That picture of the one up there in the left, that's my hand. Like, I found one in one of my gardens and I was holding it in my hand. These are just these really large moths who spin their cocoon right into a leaf there, as you can see in the bottom right. And those leaves fall off the tree in the fall and they just overwinter on the ground. So this is the case with so many insects, where they just overwinter underneath whatever tree they fell out of. And so when people ask me, like, what can I do to, support my oak trees and support these pollinators? Honestly, one of the best things you can do is have like a naturalized soft surface area underneath the drip line of your trees. So a mowing free area where these insects are able to just kind of fall out of the trees, land on the ground where it's not your lawn and you're not just going to be running it over with lawnmowers all the time. And there's a whole bunch of other reasons why that's good for oak trees too. But tonight we're specifically focusing on these insects. So next summer, that little Polyphemus moth caterpillar is gonna, or the moth is going to emerge out of that cocoon. They mate, they're only alive for like a week or something. They mate and then they end up dying. But they've laid their eggs and started the next cycle all over again. Okay, so besides leaves, which is this awesome free mulch to be able to use, the other great resource that we have for insect homes over the winter are stems. So you don't have to like go buy a structure to house these insects. You can just leave your plant stems sticking up, just leave them standing. Don't cut them down. Don't let your landscaping service cut them down in your garden. All right, leave them standing. And if you have to cut them down for whatever reason, like maybe it's aesthetics, maybe you don't like the way it looks, maybe there's like a million crazy plant stems that are like laying on your sidewalk. Cut them to 15 inches in height. All right, that's like the shortest that you should cut them to. You can also, because a lot of the insects are using that bottom layer, the bottom 15 inches of stems, so they're still able to get habitat out of that standing stem stubble. All right, and you can see a picture here. There's little insects, like all kinds of different kinds of bees, like on the left there, who are going to use the stems of plants that have pithy centers. That's just like these centers that are of the stem that's really easily excavated by them. And then they're going to spend the winter inside those stems. Okay. There's also cavity nesting bees who will use that stem next year. That dead stem that is standing in your garden right now could be a home for some cool little cavity nesting bee next spring or summer. All right, and you can see in the picture on the right there, that brown center, that's a little cap that some kind of little bee has made. After excavating the center of that stem, they laid an egg and then they close it up. And that's the top of that. That's probably a leafcutter bee or something like that, that is sealed up the top there with a little cutout section of a leaf, potentially. So, you know, you don't have to go buy something. You don't need to buy like a bee house or buy anything like that. Leave your stems standing up. So free home right there. Awesome. Now, if you do, like I said, if you do need to cut your stems for whatever reason, just leave at least 15 inches standing. And this is an example of an extremely manicured urban garden. I think this is Chicago's Lurie Garden in Millennium Park. So like right in the heart of downtown. And they've got like a team of people, you know, that maintain this. And they have a bunch of native plants in there. There's a bunch of cultivars and stuff too, but a lot of native plants in here. And they used to just kind of mow everything down in the fall. And now instead they started just cutting everything to an even 15 inches. It looks very uniform and aesthetically it looks fine. It still looks neat. And they provided some little educational signage as well about the benefits of leaving these stems standing up and how important they can be both over the winter and next spring and summer. And here's the thing, next spring and summer, the same, you know, plant leaves are going to start growing from the ground. And eventually the plant, the new growth of the plant is just going to cover up those stems. So you're not even going to see it anymore. Like it's not even a big, it's not even like it's a mess or anything like that. Here's an example of what you want to find. And this is super cool when you actually find this, when you're out walking around. You find evidence of that stem being actively used and excavated at that moment. So this is an example, and this is a quote from Heather Holm, who took this picture as well. She's got a bunch of excellent books that I'm going to show you at the end on the resource slide. She says, this is what success looks like. As insects burrow into a stem, the pith can be left at the entryway to their new nest. So keep your eyes open for this. These insects will emerge from these stems the following spring. So this is really cool. And I've actually just started finding evidence of this as it's being fall. So like in the last few weeks, I found a picture, or I found an example of this happening out at one of our sites. It looks like tiny bits of sawdust, basically, and those are tiny little bees, usually that are chewing out the center and getting ready to overwinter. And here's a little bee butt or a little abdomen of a little tiny carpenter bee who's excavating out a stem as well, again from Heather Holm. So the other thing that happens, another reason I encourage people to not just cut all your stems down, if you're able to leave them all standing, is the seeds from our native plants. And I do a whole program on how to collect seeds from your native plants to be able to spread them in other areas and get them to grow. But wildlife wants these seeds too. So things like birds and all different kinds of insects are going to use them. So first, let's talk about the picture on the left there. That's an echinacea seed head with a little goldfinch on top of it. So they're doing this right now. They're perching, and that is their food for over the winter, are these seeds. You don't have to put out bird feeders necessarily if you've got the plants that provide the seed for the birds to be able to eat over the winter. And then also galls, that picture on the right. So galls are formed, there's all different kinds of galls. There's galls that form on oak leaves. This picture here is on the stem of goldenrod, and these are called ball galls. And basically what happens is a wasp during the growing season will basically inject its eggs into the tissue of the stem of the plant, which causes a chemical reaction in the plant to happen. And it then grows, the plant swells and grows around the egg. And what you're left with is the egg having this perfect little home around it. And a lot of times there'll be like a little wall of food or nutrients around the egg. So when the egg hatches into the larva of the wasp or whatever insect it is, and you can see that little white grub looking thing, it then has food like immediately around it to be able to eat. It'd be like if you had like walls of pizza around you or something that you're just immediately provisioned with, like that would be amazing. So anyway, these little insects, these little larvae are able to then chew their way out of the gall. And this is a great time of the year to start finding them, like October and November. You really start to see these galls become really visible as a lot of the rest of the plant is kind of dying off. But these little larvae are just nutrient rich powerhouses for things like woodpeckers, who will actually kind of peck into, they'll land on the stem of the goldenrod and peck into the gall and just help themselves to the larvae as well. I know fishermen will sometimes cut them open and take those little larvae as well. Another thing that you can do in your gardens over the winter, and I mean all year round, is to leave things like dead wood, rocks, snags, which are just tall standing dead trees. So this can be done in a really artistic way too, you know, just kind of laying out pieces of dead wood strategically in your garden. It can become kind of like a visual centerpiece as well. That's also ecologically functional and used by lots of different kinds of insects. So there's lots of different beetles that are going to chew and bore down into the dead wood. Once those are kind of abandoned, they're going to be also used by things. The same hole could be used by something like this green sweat bee here. So that's really interesting to think about as well. Like the abandoned insect hole is going to be used by another insect as well. Nature doesn't really waste a lot of stuff. Woolly bear caterpillars, like you could see in the left there, we're seeing those out right now, right? And they're going to overwinter in leaf litter on the ground or inside dead wood. And next year, next spring or summer, they're going to hatch and become what's called the Isabella tiger moth, which is that yellowish moth down there. So leaving pieces of dead wood could be invaluable in your garden for pollinators to have, and just all different kinds of insects to have overwintering habitat. And the other thing you want to try to do in your garden is minimize disturbance. So minimize soil disturbance. And if you have to, you know, disturb the soil for whatever reason, like planting or whatever it is, try to just keep it shallow, less than 6 inches, just to try avoid destroying underground bee nesting sites. And a lot of times people are like, how do I find these bee nesting sites? Especially if you have bare soil, it's kind of easy to find them. Like if you spend any amount of time like down at ground level, whether it's planting or just observing on warm sunny days, you're going to start to see bees coming in and out, in and out, in and out of these tiny little holes. So anytime you find these little nesting sites throughout the year, you could just flag one of them to make sure that you're avoiding disturbance in that area. Okay. So something that let's say you're removing a bunch of like buckthorn or honeysuckle or other large invasive shrubs, instead of physically pulling that tree or shrub out by the root and creating a giant kind of soil disturbance all around it, if you've got some of these little bee nesting sites, you can simply cut it at the base and use the paint the herbicide directly on the stump. Okay, that's not just translocating all over into the soil and all the surrounding areas, but you're going to minimize soil disturbance that way. Okay, so let's talk about fire. Fire is great for plant diversity, which is really good for insect diversity. All right, but you've got to kind of take a long-term view of this, because yes, burning leaves like you see here, this is a prescribed burn, and it's a very kind of gentle prescribed burn. You can see there's like kids sitting right next to it. That's my son, don't worry, nobody was harmed. But what is important to realize is, yes, some insects are going to be harmed during this. There are some insects that are like, I'm a little cocoon down inside the leaves and I look just like a dead leaf. Okay. But the other thing, there's two things that's really important to realize. First, these burns, especially in the woods, they are not extremely deep. So if you notice, kind of like down near that kid's boot, there's a bunch of leaves there that aren't even all burned up. And if we kind of burrow down through the leaves a little bit, you'd find like another inch of leaves that aren't even 100% burned up. Okay. So doing these prescribed burns doesn't necessarily burn every single square inch. Like every leaf is not incinerated. The other thing you can do with prescribed burns is just rotate how often you do them. So you don't have to burn the same exact section of woods every single year. Okay, do a quarter of it one year, then do another quarter of it the next year. And what that does is allow the insect population to just continuously replenish itself from section to section. Okay. Burning though, prescribed burning especially, is invaluable for the health of all of our ecosystems. It's returning nutrients back to the soil. It helps control non-native invasive species like garlic mustard. It helps control woody encroachment from just especially non-native invasive, like the little seedlings of buckthorn the first year. A burn's going to help knock those back. So it's really, really important if you're able to, if your municipality allows, burning is a great tool, but it needs to be used wisely and obviously safely. Okay, so something else that you can do to help our pollinators and our native plants is to just spread the word. So, we have a program here in Illinois through our land trusts called Conservation at Home. And this program was started by the Conservation Foundation, which is a nonprofit land trust, and it's kind of branched out into other collar counties. We run it here in McHenry County. And basically, it's just a program that's promoting get some native plants in your yard, start to remove invasives. If you are doing that, it doesn't have to be done, but if you're doing that, you get a cool little yard sign. Even if which is a great way to like talk to your neighbors and friends and family about what you're doing. Even if you have no native plants in your yard, okay, and you're like, I haven't even started anything, that's fine. We'll still come do the site visit for you. We want to advise you in this. And it's all just about talking to people really about, the benefits of having these plants and these insects in our yards. Because if we all do just a little bit, if we're all able to have these little pockets of habitat on our properties, it adds up to make a difference. Okay, an example is the rusty patched bumblebee, which is a federally endangered species of bumblebee, is recorded in backyards and in municipal owned areas in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, where they are using these principles of getting native plants in and starting to remove invasives. So what you do in your yard can absolutely make a difference. And hopefully you found out tonight that it's really just very simple things like leave your leaves in your garden beds and leave them whole and leave your stems standing. It's that simple, really, to be able to support our pollinators over the winter. And here are some resources for you as well. Our websites, our phone number, we do all kinds of stuff, just like a bunch of land trusts do. We do native plant sales, all kinds of things. And then those books that I referenced, Heather Holm, she's got another one on here I don't have to, called Wasps. It's really, really interesting. She really does a fantastic job of, for one thing, having great photography and ID tips for these insects, but then matching the insects to the specific plants that they're going to use. So it's great. And it's very user friendly for everybody. You don't need like a degree in science of any kind to be able to understand her information, which is awesome. Doug Tallamy I mean, hopefully you've all heard about Doug Tallamy, and if you haven't, then I suggest checking out any of his books. Probably start with Bringing Nature Home. That really draws the connection between insects and the plants, and also other kinds of wildlife like birds who depend on the insects. And then some great websites too. People ask me for like, how do I ID this bug or this plant? I really like the free iNaturalist app. That's a great resource to identify all different kinds of insects and plants. And Illinois Wildflowers, I use that constantly for all, not just wildflowers, grasses, trees, all kinds of stuff. So lots of great websites on there. So I am going to check and see what kind of questions we have in the Q&A. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in there. Okay, Jill says they have chipped wood as mulch on their pollinator garden. Do we put leaves over top? What do we do in the spring with all of this to not have a mess? So you can put leaves on top of your wood chip mulch. And I'm going to suggest that like in future years, you eliminate using wood chip mulch. It becomes unnecessary. And once you stop using it, it's fine to use it the first year when the plants are just little babies and it helps hold some moisture in. But then as the garden matures, you want these plants to spread and be your mulch, right? And not have to be spending money on mulch and adding mulch. And honestly, you just let the leaves be the mulch. So yes, you can put leaves over the top of that. What do you do in the spring with all of this to not have a mess? You can do nothing and just leave it the way it is. You can burn it if you want to. If you know how to do that, you can burn your gardens down. And again, do it on a rotating schedule so you're not constantly burning the same thing every single year. You can kind of move some of the leaves away if you want to, but if I were you, I would let that wood chip mulch just break down and not replace it. Okay, and just let leaves be your mulch through the years. And then the plants themselves are hopefully going to be able to spread and cover everything up. So Jill says we don't cut back the stems in the spring either. If you want to, you can. But again, use that 15 inches as your guidebook. So if you're just really bothered by the way it looks, and sometimes I am, like with my front yard prairie garden, I'm like, I just don't like, I'm not okay with this looking this extremely messy. So fine, just cut them into 15 inches and you're going to still get those benefits. Now, the stems that you have cut, you can lay those on the ground. You can bundle them, okay, and put them in like a back corner section. There could still potentially be insects in some of those, all right? So you don't necessarily have to get rid of those stems either. When you lay them neatly on the ground, it actually ends up looking good. What plants have pithy stems? Oh, there's a bunch of them. I'm pretty sure on that slide, I gave some examples of pithy stems. Goldenrods, coreopsis, asters, coneflowers, elderberries, honeysuckles, like the native honeysuckles. Let's see. Oh, dwarf bush honeysuckles. Yeah, all of those are examples of things that are going to have pithy centers to them. Good question. Jacqueline says, are there certain types of leaves you'd suggest to put on the garden beds versus those that go into the compost bin? I'd like to use a species of leaves that don't act as insect hosts in my compost bin. So basically all native trees are going to act as an insect host. You want insects like in your compost bin too, like they're part of breaking everything down. So there's no problem with having insects. You want insects inside your compost bin. So any native trees are going to have insects using their leaves at some point. So I guess if you have any non-native trees, if you really don't want insects in your compost bin, any non-native tree is going to be useless to our native insects, right? But I don't know. I would just put any kind of leaves into your compost bin. I wouldn't think about it too hard. Bugs are really good things to have in there. Yeah, okay. Mimi, yes, I already covered that. How about cutting stems and stacking them in the garden somewhere else? Yeah, you can absolutely do that. You can stack them, you can bundle them. I've seen people do like cute tied little bundles of their stems and just lay them on the ground, lean them up against something. Absolutely, you can do that. Okay. Try to leave 15 inches standing though. All right. That's going to be key to leaving 15 inches standing connected to the root system underground. A lot of insects are going to get a lot of benefit from that. Okay, we've left leaves on our yard and garden beds in years past, but during the winter, I hate this. They get blown everywhere. They become a mess, piled in corners, blow on neighbors' yards. Any suggestions on how to prevent this? I know this is always an issue. I've heard of people doing things, well, strategically. You can plant certain species along the edges that are going to help catch the leaves. So there's things like, I use aromatic aster a lot on the edges of some of my gardens. They have a very mounded bush-like kind of habit that are going to trap leaves on the inside, and they stay like that all winter. All right. So they act as like a windbreak. And so things are trapped on the inside. That's not why I use aromatic aster on the edge. I just like how it looks, but that's what ends up happening, which is pretty cool. I have heard of people just like putting up tiny little fence things along the edges too, like small little decorative fences. That ends up trapping some of the leaves in there. Yeah, those are, so using plants or shrubs strategically, or some kind of little fence, or a couple solutions to that. Okay, perfect. Sycamore leaves don't break down. I do leave them in my garden. They're building up higher than the plants. Hoping somebody knows a good way to use them so they can remain. So some species of leaves do take longer to break down than others. Like oak leaves they actually, this is like an evolutionary thing. They actually like remain a solid leaf way longer than other species do. So you can use the leaf mulch pile situation if you want, where you just give it time to break down. Okay. So it's separated out of your garden until it's broken down enough to actually put it in. So if you got a million sycamore leaves, that's something that you could try doing before putting it directly into your garden. Okay. Do pine needles make good insect habitat? You know what, Marilyn? I don't know for sure. Just because where I am here in Northern Illinois, technically we don't even have any pines that are really native to my county. So I can't even answer that. And maybe there's somebody from like Northern Wisconsin or Michigan or something that can answer that. I would need to look into that to find out about pine needles. Jay, do you have any fall recommendation in areas of native shrubs? Do you mean for insects, Jay? Like what specifically? Fall recommendations in areas of native shrubs. Planted several native honeysuckles and might be vulnerable as they're in areas that I'll need to clear snow off the walks. Oh, avoid piling snow on the honeysuckles. That's a good question. So a lot of the honeysuckles, the dwarf honey, we're talking about dwarf honeysuckle, which is Durvilla lonicera. That's a native shrub. So a lot of them break over the winter anyway, like the stems. I end up just cutting them all back in March anyway, and they completely resprout and are totally fine. So it's I don't see it harming the dwarf bush honeysuckles if you do end up piling snow on top of them, or some of this, like the stems get broken off. These things just resprout and they're completely fine. Now, if you're asking about fall recommendations for pollinators in areas of native shrubs, again, it's the same principles of leave the leaves that have like fallen off the hazelnuts or fallen off the shrubs. Leave them underneath the shrubs, okay? And those are going to break down over time. Good questions. Okay, so Jay, yeah, I'd love to do anything I can to help my shrub habitats. So here's the other thing to think about with your shrub habitats, and this isn't necessarily like specific to pollinators, but getting some kind of underlayer of plants growing underneath your shrubs. So I like to recommend things. All right, and this is not going to apply to your dwarf bush honeysuckles because those things are going to sucker kind of all over the place. They don't necessarily need this. But plants that aren't going to sucker, like ninebarks or hazelnuts or serviceberries, whatever, a bunch of them that don't sucker, getting a layer of plants growing underneath them, low ground cover type plants like Pennsylvania sedge, wild strawberry, common violets that can handle some shade and some dryness too. Those are highly beneficial to your shrubs. And when you think about it, it does connect back to pollinators, because if there are pollinators who are using your shrubs and or using the dead leaves of your shrubs, when that all kind of falls and lays on the ground, you would rather have it be laying on a bed of other native plants as opposed to just bare soil, right? And it's also going to help absorb water. Like everything is going to benefit, including your shrubs, if you're able to have some kind of plant layer growing underneath them. Now, I wouldn't worry about doing that with the crazy suckering shrubs like elderberries and dwarf bush honeysuckles, because within a few years, those things are going to be suckered all over the place and are going to really cover the ground enough for you. So you don't even have to worry about that with those. Good questions, everybody. Okay, I think I got to all those. Let me just check the chat really quick. Yep, here's one. In the spring, do you leave the leaves in beds as the plants start growing? Seems like the leaves smother our growing plants in the spring. Okay, good question, Mimi. So if I go back, yeah, leave the leaves in the spring is the short answer to that. So here's a picture of it. So at least 2 inches of thick leaves that you want on the ground. And it's amazing when you walk around in like a really healthy woodland or something in the spring. So in like April, early May, before the leaves have leafed out yet in the canopy above you, and you start to walk around, if it's a healthy woodland, you're going to notice all these cool little wildflowers like this bloodroot here poking up through the soil and poking up through the leaves. Like some of these will literally grow through a dead leaf, like poke a hole and grow through the dead leaves. So no, these thick layers of leaves are not going to smother our native plants from being able to grow. Okay. The non-native plants, sure, if you've got non-native stuff, it might end up harming those because I don't know, maybe they're from a region that doesn't necessarily have all kinds of leaves in it. Maybe they're from like the tundra in Eurasia or something. I don't know. So our native plants are very used to, no matter what habitat they're in, they're generally pretty used to having a bunch of layers of dead stuff on them. All right. Now, it does help to periodically clear that out. And by periodically, I mean like every 3 years or something. And that would be mimicked by burning. And if you're not able to burn, like let stuff break down or just kind of mulch it down every once in a while, once every 3 years or so, not constantly, not all the time. All right. And so every periodically allowing some sun to get down to the soil level is also going to be beneficial, because honestly, for thousands of years, our native ecosystems have been experiencing fire. So whether it's intentionally set by Native Americans who managed the land that way, or whether it was unintentionally set by lightning, fire was a very natural component that everything basically has grown up with. So that's the long answer. Sorry, Mimi. To leave your leaves in the spring too. Every few years you can, get rid of some of them if you want to. Okay. All right. Looks like I got all the questions there. Great questions, guys. You are going to be sent this recording tomorrow or the next day, something like that. Feel free to reach out with questions. If you ever want to schedule a site visit through our Conservation at Home program, let me know. My email is down there in the bottom. If you're in a different county and you want to do conservation at home and you don't know who to do it through, just shoot me an email. I'll connect you to the correct land trust. We come over, we walk your property, we answer your questions, give you some suggestions, and then act as a follow-up resource as well anytime questions come up. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Did I miss one question? Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody have a good night. Find your local land trust. Bye.